Can you believe there's a war for children's television in the 90s and early 2000s? If you grew up in the 1990s or early 2000s, you're probably well aware of the battle for kids' television between these three stations: Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, or Cartoon Network. Every single kid had loyalty to one station, like that of loyalty with Coke and Pepsi, or your favorite candy. Of the three big channels, Nickelodeon would launch first on April 1st, 1979. They would be the first ever children's network. It would launch with programming like Pinwheel, America Goes Bananas, and Nickel Flicks. The channel to start would not have any original shows, and it would have a black and white logo. It was a far cry from the Nickelodeon that we know today. In 1981, the channel would debut the Canadian sketch comedy show You Can't Do That on Television. This would be the first introduction of green slime on Nickelodeon, which would be a key aspect of Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon was sold off by Warner Amex Satellite in 1986 to Viacom, which did not get much coverage. Nickelodeon essentially was like a thrown-in asset in the deal, but this move single-handedly saved the channel. Nickelodeon would begin to have investments in development, including the creation of the Kids' Choice Awards, Double Dare, and Nick Jr. In the late 1980s, the channel mainly consisted of live-action game shows. However, in 1989, they would begin to dabble in the world of kids' sitcoms with the likes of Hey Dude and shorts from the adventures of Pete and Pete. But it would be the early 1990s when Nickelodeon began to explode in popularity. One of the main reasons behind this was due to their work with Universal Studios Florida. Universal, a new theme park in the Orlando area, was looking for something to take on Disney MGM Studios theme park, which was supposed to be a TV movie theme park created by Disney. Universal, needing an edge, would partner with Nickelodeon, which would lead to one of the very first huge marketing deals with Pizza Hut, which helped lead Nickelodeon Magazine, which was given away at the chain's restaurants. The purpose between the Nickelodeon and Universal partnership would be to have a place to film TV shows for Nickelodeon, as well as getting the backing of Universal to support the channel to help it develop further. On August 11, 1991, Nickelodeon would debut their first ever Nicktoons with Doug, Rugrats, and The Ren and Stimpy Show. This moment would completely change the trajectory of the channel for the next 15 years. The channel would also be anchored with live-action shows like the likes of Are You Afraid of the Dark, Clarissa Explains It All That, and Keenan and Cal. The early to mid-1990s were anchored by these live-action shows, game shows, and Nicktoons. All helped lead to their rise during the 90s. Every show that they produced during the time was extremely popular. The end of the 90s and early 2000s would continue to bring promise to the channel with shows like Hey Arnold, Jimmy Neutron, Fairly Odd Parents, and of course their biggest show, SpongeBob. SpongeBob SquarePants took Nickelodeon to the next level on a different scale. Rather than focusing only on shows, content, and educational materials, due to the unbelievable popularity of SpongeBob, the company began to focus more and more on merchandising deals, whether that was video games, books, toys, or games. Though those had existed prior to the show, it was not a main investing point of the company. As of 2019, it is believed that the show single-handedly has brought $13 billion in merchandising. Throughout the mid-2000s into the 2010s and 2020s, Nickelodeon has really leaned on SpongeBob as their anchor. Though they created other success, many would say that the main golden days of Nickelodeon ended after the shows like Drake and Josh, iCarly, and Victorious. They have had other key shows in their portfolio since that time. The success of the 90s and early 2000s would lead to a target on the back of Nickelodeon as a leader. Due to their success, they were able to spin off other channels like Nicktoons, Teen Nick, Nick Jr. Now, many of these classic shows can be found on Paramount Plus, as well as many of their new content can be found there, as they've taken on the streaming perspective. The next competitor that appeared in the market of children's was the Disney Channel. Around 1977, Jim Jimmero, an executive at Walt Disney Productions, brought up the concept of building a channel dedicated to Disney content. However, it was decided that the timing was not right. This is due to the cost of Epcot and the inflation of other projects that they were working on. They would make an early deal with HBO to showcase some of their cartoons, movies, and even the production of The Seven Dwarfs at Radio City Music Hall. After gathering information based on their performance on HBO, Disney began to rethink the concept of a TV station. They would officially announce to the public that the channel would come in early 1983. They would end up investing over $11 million to acquire space on the Hughes Communications satellite. They would then invest over $20 million in programming. Disney would aim to be a premium service channel for those families who would want to pay extra for a specialty channel. On April 18th, 1983 at 7 a.m., the Disney Channel would officially premiere. That first show would be Good Morning Mickey, which essentially was just a bunch of animated shorts by Disney. Their programming would be 16 hours a day, and in their first year, they would have 532,000 subscribers. The channel would also start out by utilizing a monthly subscription service. In its early years, the channel looked much different, even with its logos and show style. What made the beginnings of the Disney Channel unique is because they utilized more free previews than the other subscriber cable channels. They would often do this to highlight the channel for kids to make them tell their parents. The 1980s to early 1990s was an interesting period for the Disney Channel. As they were a brand of new channel, they often had an odd mix of shows. The early days of the channel utilized Disney's intellectual properties, but in live-action form. Shows like Welcome to Pooh Corner, which ran from 1983 to 1986, and Dumbo's Circus, which ran from 1985 to 1997. Both utilized live-action characters and puppets. Adventures in Wonderland, which ran from 1992 to 1997, would be the final one of these style of shows. It would be similar to the other two shows, utilizing their characters in a unique fashion. During this time, they would lean into many of their older movies. They would often show a classic Disney movie in their mix. The mid-90s led to expansion for the channel, and during the same time, the world of cable was also beginning to change. The Disney Channel began to go into new markets in March 1995. They would launch their first ever international Disney Channel service, which would be in Taiwan. Anne Sweeney would help expand the channel even further in 1996, bringing it to all Southeast Asia. She would also bring about the concept of Sunday Magical World of Disney, which would be a newer movie that would be shown on premium cable. The first movie that would be shown on this would be The Lion King. During this time period, Disney would start looking into moving the channel away from the subscriber cable model, instead to add it to basic cable service. The late 1990s into the early 2000s was when the channel began significant changes. They would shorten the name to just Disney Channel. It would totally do a complete rebrand with a new logo. They would continue to utilize the big movies on the channel as well, like that of Pocahontas. Around 1997 and 1998, the channel would also switch from a premium service to a basic cable channel. They began to market to the larger audience of kids and families. Disney Channel began to make it more engaging for preteens with things like music videos and concerts. Due to the growth in 1997, they would split into 3 different blocks: Playhouse Disney, Vault Disney, and Zoog Disney. Playhouse Disney's popularity would explode due to the show Bear and the Big Blue House, which made its debut in October 1997, which was named as one of the top shows for kids. Zoog Disney would lean into technology and computers, showing commercials with computer animation into those famous Disney classics that we knew and loved. Later in the 90s and early 2000s, they would begin to lean into sitcoms and live-action unique shows. Shows like The Famous Jet Jackson in 1998 and So Weird in 1999 would have great popularity. However, it would not be until the debut of Lizzie McGuire when Disney began to get a jump on the competition. This would be considered by many to be the golden years of Disney Channel, where some of their biggest shows and Disney Channel original movies would debut. Shows like Even Stevens, That's So Raven, both would eventually lead to shows like The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, as well as Hannah Montana. In the early 2000s, they would also look to compete better on the cartoon front on Disney Channel with shows like The Proud Family and Kim Possible, both of which would be extremely popular and help make Disney reevaluate their cartoons. It is important to note that Disney did utilize cartoons in their portfolio from the past with shows like Rescue Rangers, DuckTales, and Darkwing Duck. This would be known as the Disney Afternoon, a programming block of animated shows that would be seen on the UPN. They would also be seen on Disney's One Saturday Morning, as well as some other unique cartoon shows. For the most part, it was not until The Proud Family and Kim Possible that original cartoons or newly developed cartoons would be on the Disney Channel. Hilary Duff, Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, Raven Simone being utilized for various different aspects. Disney learned to utilize their talent for all areas, including shows, movies, and music. Through this mix, they were also able to place the characters in the Disney parks for events such as meet and greets and concerts, thus creating the ultimate synergy machines, something Nickelodeon was not able to capture. They would also utilize their Disney MGM Studios theme park as a filming location for many of their TV shows for ABC as well as some Disney Channel shows. Again, trying to build out that synergy aspect, which meant the Orlando area was a filming battleground between Disney and Nickelodeon. Disney Channel original movies would also be an important aspect of their success. Movies like High School Musical and holiday movies like Halloween Town, which would completely change the way Disney would look at their Disney Channel original movies. They would see the profitability and make sequels, specifically with High School Musical. They would see the larger merchandising picture. This type of movie would lead to movies like Camp Rock, Zombies, and Descendants. High School Musical 2 would have the most viewers of any Disney Channel original movie with over 17 million views. Disney Channel also in the mid-2000s would essentially give up on animated shows after the success of Kim Possible and the Proud Family. It would not be until they saw success with Phineas and Ferb that they would bring it back. Rather, they would leave these new animated shows for their secondary channels like that of Toon Disney. Toon Disney would be a paid-for cable channel that included some Disney Channel content, but mainly animated shows. It would show those older shows like Disney's Doug, Hercules, and the Little Mermaid animated series. The channel would launch in 1998, however, it would not gain popularity until the early 2000s. In 2004, Toon Disney would add the programming block called Jetix, which would lean into their newest edition of purchasing Saban Entertainment. Many to this day say the golden era of Disney Channel ended in the mid-2000s, though some say Liv and Maddie was the last great show by the channel. Like Nickelodeon though, Disney Channel would launch the careers of many superstars like that of Zac Efron, Dove Cameron, Miley Cyrus, and Selena Gomez. Also like Nickelodeon, Disney has also begun investing heavily in their streaming service. They would bring the bulk majority of their Disney Channel shows, movies, and Toon Disney to Disney+, which has helped with bringing many of these old shows back into popularity. Disney Plus has begun developing several sitcoms for preteens and families like that of Mighty Ducks Game Changers and Big Shot. They are still to this day trying to recapture the success of the 2000s. The final children's programming station we will look at is Cartoon Network. Cartoon Network was different due to the fact that they were going to only be focused on cartoons. Compared to the other two channels where they had live action shows and game shows, the ideas began after Ted Turner's company, Turner Broadcasting, purchased the libraries from MGM and United Artists in 1986. This meant Turner owned the MGM cartoon library, including the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies shorts. In 1991, Turner beat out all competitors to purchase the animation studios of Hanna-Barbera for $320 million. Now with the pairing of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons and the Looney Tunes mix, on February 18, 1992, the Turner announced that they would create Cartoon Network. On October 1st, 1992, Cartoon Network would launch to an explosion on TV. The first cartoon show would be Rhapsody Rabbit. Cartoon Network, after all their acquisitions, would have over 8,500 hours of cartoons to utilize. Cartoon Network would become the first over 24-hour cartoon channel. In the early days of Cartoon Network, they essentially leaned into their acquired asset, focused on shows like Looney Tunes, Johnny Quest, Space Ghost, Tom and Jerry. Shows that would relate back to families. Cartoon Network also had a unique advantage compared to Nickelodeon and Disney, as it could be packaged to new subscribers with TNT and TBS. The first original show they would create would be The Moxie Show, which would premiere in 1993. In 1994, they would create one of their more unique shows when we would see the development of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which was essentially a talk show between Space Ghost and celebrities. It cost Cartoon Network the minimum to do because many of the celebrities were past their prime. Many have considered Space Ghost Coast to Coast as the main reason Cartoon Network was able to grow during its early days. The channel would then create Hanna-Barbera, a Cartoon Network Studios, which would develop the variety show known as What a Cartoon. The show was used as a test for all their new upcoming shows like Dexter's Laboratory, which would be the first spin-off series in 1995. Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and the Powderpuff Girls would all have their debuts as shorts. These shows would lead to what was called Cartoon Cartoons, being the new brand of the company, which would eventually become their Friday highlight. In 1995, Cartoon Network would make a big leap in the digital age with their Cartoon Network Online as part of AOL. They utilized it to push their channel even further, offering merchandise, games, and previews. Also in 1996, Turner would merge with Time Warner, creating a powerhouse. This would allow them to access the entire portfolio of Warner Brothers Animation. Besides just the early Looney Tunes, they were being shown already on the channel. This would also give them access to the wide variety of superheroes from the DC universe to utilize. Shows like Justice League and Batman would help popularize the channel even more. This merger also allowed them to own the WB's Kids block, and they could utilize it as a sibling broadcast network. Cartoon Network would bring their programming to Canada in 1996, when eventually they brought their big shows there on the channel YTV. In 1997, Cartoon Network would venture into the world of anime. They called this block Toonami, which consisted of Thundercats, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and many others. Like what we saw with Nickelodeon and Disney, Cartoon Network would also venture into secondary channels when the world of digital and satellite cable began taking off. As Cartoon Network had been moving to newly created shows, they would bring about Boomerang to bring back their former portfolio like Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Boomerang originally was an early morning block on Cartoon Network, but they saw the potential in making it an appealing channel for older adults. In 2001, Cartoon Network would lose their president, Betty Cohen, who left over creative differences. This brought changes to the channel, including the debut of Adult Swim. In the early 2000s, the channel did also start to bring its popular shows to the movie platform with the Powerpuff Girls movie and Ed, Edd n Eddy movie. However, they were not as successful as they would have liked. They would also drop the branding of cartoons. Shows like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends would help carry the channel into a new era, both of which were extremely popular and considered to be huge successes. In the mid-2000s, Cartoon Network tried to recapture some of its late 1990s and early 2000s success, but they struggled to find an identity. Shows like Chowder and The Regular Show helped bring in new viewers and hold on to many of their older fans. In the 2010s, they began rebranding just to CN. They would bring about shows like The Amazing World of Gumball and Adventure Time. Both of these shows would be very popular for the channel. From around 2012 to 2020, Cartoon Network began to test out different bumpers and branding with the goal to recapture some of the magic of the early days. AT&T would reach a deal to acquire Time Warner, which would include the purchase of Cartoon Network. The channel would also begin to jump into other areas like that of Nickelodeon and Disney. Cartoon Network would have their characters on a new ship, part of the Oceanic Group, and they would develop their own hotel in Lancaster County while working with Palace Entertainment. The 2020s have brought a rebrand of the company completely. They are now looking for new avenues to build the organization further, and they believe the entertainment region may be key for this. Cartoon Network's investment in being a cartoon-oriented channel was one that was extremely unique for the time it started. They also jumped into the world of streaming through HBO Max, where many of the classic Cartoon Network cartoons can be found. Who is or was the winner between the three for the war for kids TV? To many people, that is very subjective due to the different popularity of shows on each channel. Many of you probably have very fond memories of coming home from school watching a show before it was time to start homework. In some popular opinion, people believe Nickelodeon ruled the world of cartoons in the 90s to the early 2000s, where then Cartoon Network would get the advantage afterwards. But this does not take into account Disney Channel, who really has never focused solely on cartoons. For this, we look to live-action shows. Some would say Nickelodeon dominated in the 90s into the early 2000s, where they would then lose popularity with many of the new Disney Channel shows. The one thing that did make Disney different from Nickelodeon is the utilization of their actors and actresses. Disney found a way to build their portfolios in other areas like movies or music, hence creating a synergy machine unlike the other two channels. Across the board, though, they've seen ratings plummet for these big three, mostly which can be attributed to streaming services. In reality, though, it all comes down to your opinion. Who do you consider to be the winner of your childhood for TV? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, and like the video. Believable truths?